My pleasure. Thank you, Phil. So welcome again to this annual celebration of the radio audio feature, past, present and future. And brilliant to be here in Liverpool for the first time here in Liverpool. I grew up in Southport, just up the road. So most of my teenage years were spent in Liverpool. So it's great to be back here in this fine, fine city. Once again this year we are live streaming this event on our YouTube channel, so I'd like to say a very warm welcome to those joining the conference via the live stream. As Phil said, we're going to be hearing much more about Charles Parker over the course of today. The radio ballads, which of course are over 60 years old now. 60th anniversary of the final radio ballad, we're going to be hearing about that. We're going to be talking about how revolutionary they were and still are, changed the audio radio feature forever. That thing of putting ordinary voices on air, amazing. So we're going to be talking about all that. As Phil said, I'm Kelly, I produce radio, I do folk music, and the company 7 Digital, we used to be called Smooth Operations, and so we revived the radio ballads in 2006 for Radio 2, and my mum sang quite a few of the songs on that, so keeping it in the family like we do in folk music. So we are joined today by lovers of the radio ballads and of Charles Parker's amazing production, of creative feature production. Many students are here from around the country, and all but one of the nominees for this year's Charles Parker Prize for the Best Student Feature are here with us as well in person, which is amazing. Thank you all for coming. Irene is watching at home in Rome. So hello, Irene. Everyone say hello, Irene.
Hello, Irene.
Shame you can't be here, but thank you for tuning in. And we're also joined today by two former winners who we'll be hearing from later on. And we have not one but three BBC commissioning editors here today. Hugh Levinson, Matthew Dodd and Tammy Walker. So welcome to everybody. After the tea break, which is coming later at 3:30, there's going to be a break at 3:30. And then after that, all of the students here are going to be invited to a masterclass across the square involving those commissioners, talking about ideas and how to sell ideas. So we're going to talk a bit more about that later on. So let's get started to our first session. So the Charles Parker Prize has been running since 2005. And winners have gone on to great things, names you will recognise have become established. Hannah Walker-Brown, Katie Birmingham, Hannah Dean, Maya Bosworth, to name just a few. And since 2019, Radio 4 have chosen 5 winners to be broadcast in the new storyteller slot on Radio 4. That's happening again. We can talk about that later on. But we want to find out about this year's entries and to hear from the 10 nominees. So here to tell us and to introduce those nominees to us is a former BBC creative director who has been the chair of the judging panel for the Charles Parker Prize since the very start of the prize. So please give a very warm welcome to Simon Elms.
Hello, and here we are again. What a lovely, thank you, Kelly, very much indeed. What an moment, and a lot of people are going to be holding their breaths a little bit. Can we hear? No?
Try that one.
I have no? Ah, you can hear. Excellent. Very good. Excellent. Jolly good. Right. So I'm not going to do a very big preamble, but I do want to say thank you to everybody because it was a hell of a competition this year. I mean, really, really amazing. A rich assortment of entries, slightly more than the last few years, which is great, bouncing back after COVID. New contributing colleges and organisations as audio courses at some of our classic institutions evolve and, sadly, in some cases disappear. New entrants have joined the Charles Parker competition with new blood, new ideas, and a fresh take on the audio feature, which is fantastic. It's been a fantastic year, in fact, for high-quality productions, which has made it incredibly hard for us, in a good way. Which, thankfully, I had no fewer than 7 jurors to help me come to a fair outcome. I hope they agree. They are in alphabetical order from all bits of the broadcasting and audio spectrum. Talia Augustidis, who's a former Charles Parker winner herself, and now another of joining us on the committee. Rachel Cunliffe, Mel Harris, Joe Meek, Stephen Rajam, Philip Sellers and Tammy Walker, a spread of BBC people and non-BBC people right across the piece. Let's have some applause for those judges. They deserve it. So, the 8 members of our judging panel had a mesmerising range of features on offer this year, from the story of a little-known Sicilian community in Hertfordshire, Hoddesdon. Did anybody know that Hoddesdon had a Sicilian? They all came to grow cucumbers after the war, apparently. It's a fantastic, fantastic story. And the real-life experience of an artist's naked life model. What it actually feels like to go inside the head of a sufferer from attention deficit disorder. And the sounds of life as heard simply through the window of a North London apartment. So the winnowing was a challenge and very far from obvious. In the end, we judges arrived at a shortlist of 10 features that were both the cream of the crop and offered a wide range of insights into the human condition. So, as per tradition, I'm going to present 3 little clumps of samples from these programmes. The first batch, you'll hear what it's like actually to ride the London Underground all through the depths of a London night in All Night Long by Daria Kalsi of Goldsmiths, University of London. The judges called this an enjoyable, impressive entry with such a good balance of different moods, personalities and characters. A really well-made musical piece. Let's have a quick applause. Thank you, Daria. Then from In the Dark, a new entrant, an extract from James Bonney's programme about the hardy souls who throw them down a slippery and steep slope in Bristol's Avon Gorge for fun. It's called The Slidey Rock, and the judges loved the sense of playfulness and fun, the sheer joy and childlike wonder of the subject, conveying the sense of wildness and speed, the sense of exhilaration, joyous. And the first clip we're going to hear comes from Libby Lidbird's, I hope that's how you... Liebird, sorry. Sorry. Persuasive and powerfully made programme produced for UCL about women's boxing. It was called Fight Fair, and the judges commented, this maker has raw talent, real raw talent. It was very moving and terrific to hear her determination, a marvellous programme by a maker who knows absolutely what she's doing. So here are the first 3 clips.
I'm a single mum, and at that time I was struggling. I'd gone through a messy breakup from my son's dad, and then my son and I were evicted from our home. Exhausted from juggling the small amount of freelance work I had with the housing system and money and school runs and parenting alone, I hit rock bottom. I felt like a failure. But I'm a fighter. And a tiny spark within me told me to fight. That perhaps getting physically strong might just help me get mentally strong.
I think that makes sense because of how difficult it must have been.
And I so want my son to see me strong.
You wanted to feel powerful and show me that you were powerful.
I'm not sporty, but I am a trier, and God loves a trier, so I tried.
You're starting on a footpath. You have to crouch down and squeeze between 2 iron railings. Slightly slidey at the top, so you sort of have to go down half on your bum. There's this crevice, and then you've reached the actual top of Slidey Rock. Right, okay, I've got my bottom on now. Got my legs in front, and now if I lie flat, then that will hopefully... Okay, now there are people watching. Okay. Here we go. Oh! I'm picking up speed now. Oh! Lost speed! Oh!
That is speedy! Bloody hell!
It's not even fast!
That's not as comfortable as it looks.
It's getting a lot of weird stares right now from, like, old white men. I just don't really need this right now. But people are really just very touchy on the night tube. I'll just leave that there, and then you can figure out the rest. Very touchy people on the night tube. I don't know how I feel about that. Do you feel safe on the night tube?
I do feel safe. However, I can understand why not everybody feels safe in central London at the moment. You see things on a night out that can make people feel uneasy.
I saw a poor lady who got her head caught in the doors once and fell over.
There is a lot of dark characters that make people feel a little bit uneven. Like even tonight, I've seen a few actions where you don't want to see that on a night out.
Men trying to grab me, and I'm not okay with that, and I hit them immediately.
Fear and loathing on the London Underground in the depths of the night. Thank you, all three. It's a very different human emotion that ties together our next three shortlisted programmes. Family love and emotional pain and suffering that can be caused by relationships that have been in some way disrupted by life and death. So many families have been afflicted, some catastrophically, maybe some here, by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's hard to know where to begin to do justice to their stories. But in Friends of the Wall by Evan Green of Goldsmiths, University of London, some of those who survived but whose relatives died came together to tell their stories. They meet regularly to maintain the COVID memorial wall on the bank of the Thames in London, directly opposite the Houses of Parliament. A simple yet riveting idea, said the judges, told through marvellously articulate speakers, a powerful story with a lot of heart and just a fantastic piece of work. More intimate and altogether... Oh, less applause. Sorry, guys. Yeah. More intimate and altogether more optimistic is Recipe for Recovery. Anna de Wolf-Evans' programme for UCL tells the story of her mother's near-fatal cancer and of her successful recovery from it, recounted through the processes of mum's domestic delight, jam making. This was, the judges said, a beautifully told story, very gentle but hopeful, sonically interesting and easy on the ear. And first in this selection, we have Full Circle by Amy Bartlett for the University of the West of England in Bristol. This tells the complex story, family story, of singer Dawn, who grew up an outsider in Belfast during the Troubles. An impressive piece of work, according to the judges, highly personal, well told, and with really powerful use of music to move along the storytelling. I was gripped and horrified.
I had felt very alienated when I moved to that area. I was this English girl. My mother had married into a family that didn't know that she was a divorced woman with children. So when I arrived, I had to pretend to be her niece. So everything was about feeling like an outsider. It was very hard. And of course, I was a pretty girl, so I took the attention that was bestowed on me by older boys and men and ran with that. You know, at least somebody wanted me, because it seemed that my mother didn't want me, my stepfather didn't want me, the school didn't want me. It was just awful. So, yeah, I used to go out on these dates and pretend to be all grown up. And that is how I ended up pregnant at 15.
Well, Mama don't want you no more. Papa don't love you for sure. Love child, my dove child, let Mama make it all right. Don't you know Mama makes it all right?
Step 1. Gathering, collecting, recollecting.
We need to keep our eyes peeled. This little spot here, I'd say, was perfect foraging location because we've got brambles, we've got sloe bushes, and there are some roses.
About 6 months ago, while I was at Glastonbury, I received a message from my mum. I got a handshake from the consultant, she said, the equivalent of a Paul Hollywood handshake. I called her straight away and she explained that she was now in remission. There were no longer signs of cancer. After a long exchange of tears and relief, we collected ourselves, and a sort of awkward silence fell upon the phone, as if to say, now what?
You see, Robin. With each month comes a new fruit, and it's a compulsion. I have to pick. You see these little... That's slow. And it's the kind of gathering, there's something about that initial gathering that brings me so much comfort.
I get the bus here, and when that bus comes over the bridge and I see those red hearts, that half a kilometre of red hearts, I get excited because I know I'm going to be there helping to maintain it.
And still, every time I walk down those stairs each week, the enormity of the loss hits you every single time. It doesn't matter that I'm painting hearts here every week. I'm still hit by the enormity and the beauty of it, actually, which is a strange thing to say about a wall that's a memorial wall. But it's, you know, it's a raw outpouring of grief. That's how I see the wall.
I don't come from London, I'm from Stoke-on-Trent, so when I travel on a Friday, it's 150 miles to get here. Very expensive as well, but it's worth it because here I'm not on my own, am I? I'm with all this, you know, and as long as I can, I will get to this wall and I will make sure this doesn't fade.
And so to our final clutch of nominees for the Charles Parker Awards for Student Feature 2024. First up in this set of 4 clips, I'm going to take you on a journey to East London and the past, a very strange and alien past, to a cemetery, in fact, which is a burial site of tens, hundreds possibly, of former sex workers. But The Outcast Dead and Alive by Grace Reeve of Goldsmiths is far more fantastical than my bald description can convey. The judges said this was bonkers and rather wonderful, unusual, profound, and embedded deep in the social history of ordinary people. It made me want to go and visit the graveyard. Still in London, applause. Keep forgetting the applause. Sorry, guys. So, still in London, Reconnection is the story of a young woman's relationship with her beloved grandfather. Now she is his carer when once she was cared for by him. And together in Chantal Romain's street-based documentary for UCL, she reconnects with him through the sights and the sounds of his early life. Intriguing, said the judges. It told a story that was both very personal and still relatable, with lively scenes and a refreshing spontaneity and a vivid quality of recollection. Another meeting of minds features in the beguilingly titled The Tale of the Two Spoons. Irene Dani's feature for In the Dark is an intriguing chronicle of one elderly woman, Christiane's, passion for collecting spoons. Yes, teaspoons, tablespoons, every sort of spoons. Each holds, she says, its own historical memory. But how does this connect with the life of a recently deceased Italian in Florence? For the judges, this programme was absolutely charming and beautifully and musically put together, a real audio delight. Well made and unusual, it felt refreshingly light, but without losing depth. And to begin this last selection of our shortlisted entries, a programme again for UCL about the magic of Yiddish. Naomi Bloomstein calls her programme the national language of nowhere. And the judges called it very, very accomplished, with such a creative use of the medium where the music really drove it. A beautifully made programme and definitely in the top bracket on so many levels.
Yiddish is a language of coughing and spitting, so I wore a raincoat till I was about 15, 16 years old.
He's a maven.
Bagel. Mishigas.
Zoigatus.
Kvetch.
Share.
Quelling. Ballabuster. Schwitzig. Such a schlamazel. Klutz. A mensch. Schmooze.
Oy vey.
And then they make up words. If they couldn't remember something, they make up something. Darling, the, chuch.
We know that primarily Yiddish speakers, they lived in Central and Eastern Europe for hundreds of years. But it was not a Yiddish country. The Yiddish land is in the mouth of its speakers. That's Yiddish land. There's no territory.
I think I like spending time with Christiane because she's an older person. She gives me access into times different to my own.
Prepare yourself for a shock. John calls it the overflow room.
Times to forget things. Times to focus on details. I experience it less lately since my grandmother died a year ago.
These are called dog nose because of the actual top looks like the nose of a dog.
Christiane is a liminal, timeless figure. She could be a holy woman of an ancient temple or a forest elf.
So when I die, what shall I do with them?
We were born in Jamaica.
Amen.
I came to England 1960.
Amen.
There wasn't a good life. The life that we received in the 60s, come on up to the 70s.
Amen.
It wasn't very good. It was punishing situation you got to go through every day. You never feel happy.
Amen.
Because when we come here and they still leave white people in Jamaica, but everybody always live good. But when you come here, it was a different thing. And when you come up, them said, "Hey, where you come from? Why did you left your country and come here?" If I did have the money, I would turn back the next day when daylight. I didn't like it.
If happiness is far away.
I was born a goose of Southwark by the grace of Mary Overy, whose bishop gives me license to sin within the liberty. In bankside stews and taverns, you can hear me honk right daintily as I unlock the hidden door, unveil the secret history.
There's so many words and so few words to describe it. It's the unconsecrated burial ground of at least 15,000 to 60,000 people buried under there. It's a pauper's burial ground in a very poor part of London on Red Cross Way, which was the worst street in the whole of London where policemen wouldn't even walk down singly.
What we celebrate here at Crossbones isn't so much just the history, but very much the folklore. And the goose, they were called Winchester geese, these medieval sex workers. The goose, over the centuries, and especially over recent decades and years, has become to be a symbol of the outcast or the marginalised.
The goose is a spirit voice that John Constable is connected to through his shamanic double. And the first time he met her was at these gates 27 years ago tonight.
Wow, wow, wow. I think you just got a hint from the range of subjects, the range of treatments, the range of singing, just the sheer range. what a hell of a struggle the judges and I had this year, because they're a fantastic shortlist. Congratulations to all of you. So there you have it, our 10 shortlisted programmes for the Charles Parker Prize 2024. The massive task, we did get to a gold winner, but not now. Later on, you'll hear who won that gold award and the 4 other programmes which have been selected to be broadcast alongside it in this year's New Storytellers. You'll have to wait, though. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's have another round of applause for 10 amazing winners. You can, if you wish to do so, you can hear all of the nominees chatting about their entries to Sarah Parker. We'll hear more about Sarah later, but Charles's daughter. And you can find those interviews on the Charles Parker Trust YouTube channel. So what's next? Well, next we're going to tell you that the very first Charles Parker Day was held in 2004. This whole conference to celebrate the radio feature was the idea of Sean Street, who was the UK's first professor of radio. That very first conference was held at Sean's University in Bournemouth, which is where Charles Parker himself was born in the year 1919. So we are really pleased now to be able to welcome Sean back to Charles Parker Day in his now adopted city of Liverpool. Sean is a radio presenter, a writer, he's a poet. Only yesterday, his latest collection of poems, Running Out of Time, was published. And he's not going to speak about Charles Parker, though, but about another famous BBC radio features producer. I'll let him tell you all about it. Give a warm welcome, please, to Professor Sean Street.
Can you hear me? Are we on the air? Good. Hello. It's lovely to be here, and thank you very much, Kelly. I want to talk about a producer, legendary producer, really, for many people, who will be known by many, and by his personality and his character will be known by many people who are in this room and watching at home. Here's first Charles Parker Day. There's a photograph I cherish of Piers. All right. Sorry. Right. Still learning how to use a microphone for all this time. It's a photograph I cherish from the very first Charles Parker Day on the lawn of the Miramar Hotel in Bournemouth, of 2 people who spoke at that day and who were really instrumental in saying that Charles Parker Day should happen. One was Piers and one was Gillian Reynolds. Piers was not only internationally known as a radio producer, he was also known as a communicator too. Many universities and colleagues were beneficiaries of Piers' urbanity that covered up a wealth of knowledge and imagination, but he was a very urbane speaker. And Piers died in 2021. And so there's a generation now of people who won't have that benefit. And fortunately, the School of Sound, run by Larry Sider, which is, if you're not familiar with it, do go to the School of Sound website. It's absolutely a treasury for sound lovers. School of Sound exists to explore radio sound, audio sound of all kinds, film, everything. But Piers, for the whole duration of the 4-day biennial festival that was run by the School of Sound between 1998 and 2017, Piers gave the opening lecture. It became something of a tradition that the School of Sound conference could not happen unless Piers gave that opening lecture. And fortunately, all those lectures were recorded. So we have Piers' voice, and we have the content of those lectures. And they've just gone online, most of them. I'll say a little bit more about that shortly. But they're all online, and I would really, my purpose in being here today is to draw your attention to that if you've not already discovered it, because I would recommend it. It's teaching as you would love it to be, really. Over those years, Piers covered a whole range of subjects because his actual interests were huge and very wide. But it all comes down to sound. It all comes down to mystery, something that he called the God of location recording. You know, that God that rings a bell just at the moment when you're out recording and the speaker's just finished speaking and a bell rings or something like that. That's the God of location recording, according to Piers. But at the root of it is the mystery, the sound, and the silence. But I've done enough talking. I want you to. My purpose here is for you to hear some of this stuff. So here's Piers talking about mystery and what is at the heart of a good radio program from the School of Sound in 1998.
It begins with silence. And after silence,
there was a pool of perfect water. No shepherd had ever driven sheep to trample the margins. No cattle had slobbered their muzzles in it and befouled it. No wild beast had ever dashed through it. No bird had ever paddled there, preening and bathing. Only surrounding grasses drank its moisture. And though the arching trees kept it cool, no twigs rotted in it, and no leaves. Weary with hunting and the hot sun, Narcissus found this pool. Gratefully he stretched out full length, to cup his hands in the clear cold and to drink. But as he drank, a strange new thirst, a craving, unfamiliar, entered his body with the water, and entered his eyes with the reflection in the limpid mirror. He could not believe the beauty of those eyes that gazed into his own. As the taste of water flooded him, so did love.
Well, I don't have to tell you, probably that's Ted Hughes, recorded just very few months before he died, reading from his own version of Ovid's Metamorphoses, the story of Echo and Narcissus. I love it for about 600 reasons, but let me give you about 3. 1, it's a wonderful voice. 2, it's a wonderful text. 3, it's a wonderful story. And I think in a way Narcissus and Echo is a neat allegory of the end of our century, because we spend too much time looking in mirrors and not enough time listening. I also love it because it encapsulates the power of the word. And I suppose the word really is in the beginning, almost, and round it everything else crystallizes and spreads. And I like what Larry just said about John Wayne's voice, that our voice is much more than words, but it is essentially words presented in cadence and rhythm and so on. So when I hear Ted Hughes' voice like that, and perhaps you could just hear, I'm not sure, through the window the birds in his garden, there's something quite extraordinary about that. Very contrived, very controlled, very perfect, but resonating. And I would bet, if I went round this hall and said, what images flowed through your mind when you heard him? There would be a great number of images, some connected with water, some connected with love, some very personal. But the pool of your mind would have been set rippling by those words. And I suppose as a radio producer, 30 years' worth of radio producing, plus a lot of cinema going, it's that pool that I'm interested in, and how it is triggered and how it is rippled into visuality, horrible word, but how you see things by hearing. St. Bernard of Clairvaux is on our list. He's not here today, but he says, doesn't he, if you wish to see, listen. Now,
you couldn't ask for a better start to Charles Parker Day than those words, could you really? if you wish to listen. Everything happens in a place. And even if that place is ultimately inside here, inside our minds, Plowright explored that idea further in a 2005 School of Sound talk.
The great American architect Philip Johnson, who died very recently, once said that all the great buildings in the world are one-room buildings. Well, I think I understand what he means. The great space of cathedrals, mosques, even office blocks, imaginatively done, are somehow one great space in which many things happen. And I think that is profoundly true of radio. The great space in our heads, the great acoustic space which can be filled with complexity, simplicity, words, music, silence. We cut out silence, and that's the problem with our modern world. You cut out the soul's beat. In the other arts, some of the great thinkers and directors have spoken about the space in which that mystery happens. I'm thinking of Peter Brook, The Empty Space, that seminal book on theatre. I'm thinking of a quote from Mario Petrucci, a poet working in Britain, who said, "Poetry, radio and music are a way of amplifying silence." Nice quote. I'm thinking of Samuel Beckett's dramatisation of emptiness. And I was present at the first performance in English of Waiting for Godot in 1956, I think. And although I was too young really to get what it was on about, I knew I was seeing something quite different and hearing something quite different. Secrets, mystery. I've never forgotten that evening. Radio is about invitation and prohibition. It's so easy to ignore it. Once you give yourself to it, it is overwhelming, I think. I remember my ex-boss, Martin Estlin, a great dramaturg and scholar of theatre, saying that if you see a film of a dead actor, it's a dead actor. If you hear a tape of a dead actor, it's still alive because of the breath. And I think that makes a powerful point about the intimacy and the force of radio, of the voice and sound coming straight into the ear. I caught the other day an exhibition in which there was an old recording of the British poet Philip Larkin reading his poem Cut Grass, which is about death. And again, this slightly throwaway, sarcastic voice with all the held me absolutely grippingly. The power of sound, the power of the voice.
Piers's cultural terms were, as I said at the beginning, vast. I knew Piers mostly outside of his BBC life. We were friends for 30 years, and we just tended to meet and have meals together and talk about radio, of course, but all sorts of other things. Art, he was a good artist. Poetry, he wrote poetry. He was learning jazz piano when he died. There was a whole Piers world that was very, very rich. In terms of his programmes, he was a listener, as you'll have gathered, what St. Bernard said. He wasn't always very keen on having presenters. He felt sometimes the wrong kind of presenter, who was the professional presenter, kind of got between the programme and the listener. And here he is talking about that idea from the very first School of Sound in 1998.
When you come to the visual arts, I think radio is an absolutely excellent way of talking about them. I'd like to play you a little extract from a programme I made about Van Eyck's wonderful painting, the Arnold Feeney double portrait, in the you can see it here in London's National Gallery. This is a woman talking about the painting. You would have thought it would not work. I think it probably does.
A man in dark clothing, his hand raised. A woman in a green, bulky robe, her hand in his, her hand on her belly, looking down at his clogs that he's removed, lying casually at the front. The dog, startled, looking outwards, looking at me, looking at the viewer, looking at the artist, because we know the artist is there, because the artist is in the mirror. We know that other people are there as well. And then we look at the bed. Brilliant red bed, huge bed. It goes on way out of the picture. There's the chandelier with one lit candle, even though the day is quite light and the light is coming in. A string of beads, shining beads on the wall behind, next door to the mirror. We look into the mirror and we can see out of the window. We can see more out of the window through the mirror than we can see by looking out of the window itself. And the light comes in behind. And hanging on the bedpost, there's a brush, presumably a brush which is symbolic of all sorts of things to do with housework, getting rid of the devil, and it looks rather like the dog.
There are no corners in that. That's what I like about it. I don't like radio programs where people say, I'm now standing in front of Arnolfini's portrait, and it's a bright sunny day, and the shadows are falling across it. To me, that misses the point of radio, which is to take you to the heart of it, straight in, without the corners. And film, for me, does that too. It's a great problem with visual arts on television, I think, very often, that it doesn't actually add much. An expert wanders in, close-ups of details in the picture, but somehow the magic of the picture has gone. And it is that ambiguity, that silence, that space, the correct placing of silence and image that I think is so important in both the media.
Yes, the ambiguity, that kind of mystery. We're back to that, really. This archive online is work in progress, I should say. We haven't got all the lectures up there yet. At the moment, I think there are about 7 of the 11 lectures available. Dead easy to find. Just Google the School of Sound, and when you get there, you'll see a picture of Piers, and click on it, and you'll be into the lecture series. We have 4, I think it is, more lectures to go up, which we've been sorting out questions of the audio and so forth. So 2011, 13, 15, and 17, which was the last, still to come. Intriguingly, one of those lectures was inspired by Bobby Gentry's Ode to Billy Joe. So think about Piers's lecture. You couldn't possibly think how does he, on earth, is he going to talk for 40 minutes about Ode to Billy Joe? Well, he gets there. There are recurrent themes, as I've said, the voice and silence being among them. And silence is crucial, absolutely crucial. It comes back time and time again in these lectures. Listen to this from 2005.
An old lady called Alison Whaley, widow of the translator from the Chinese and the Japanese Arthur, remembers his death on a June morning in 1965 or something like that. But what struck me about this, and I learned a very important editing trick, which is not to edit. Here is the whole piece. Alison Whaley, remembering the death of her husband Arthur, she mentions a poem that he dedicated to her by a Chinese poet. But you don't need to know anything else.
We always waked at 5 or 6 in the morning, and it was June, you see, and it was a blazing hot June when he died. And I wheeled his bed to the open window upstairs, and the sun streamed in on us, and we threw back the coverlets and stripped off everything that got brown in the sun, as we always did every morning, because the nurse came in at 8 o'clock. And then the day would become rather hideous, you know. Medical questions, which were not interesting to either of us. Arthur was not in pain. His spine was broken just between the shoulder blades, so from the breast down, he was paralyzed. He felt no pain. I asked him, "Are you in pain?" And he said, "I have never been so comfortable in my life." And I said, "And you look so happy. Why should I not be happy? I have music and you to read to me. Why should I not be happy?" And on this morning, we looked out at the sky, which was cloudless. and brilliant. And Arthur had inserted into his new book of poems a poem which Arthur said was for me alone. It was by Feng Meng Lu. And it was called Don't Set Sail. It's very short. It begins, don't set sail. Tomorrow the wind may have dropped. And then you can go, and I shan't trouble about you. And on the morning of Arthur's death, there'd been a tremendous gale, a storm in the garden all through the night. And I had flung up the window, and there was the clear sky and not a breath of wind. And I turned and called back to him, "Darling, the wind has dropped." And he said, "Then I may go, and you shall not trouble about me." I thought my heart would stop, but it was true. It was just like that.
There's something, I think, spellbinding about that tale, almost Homeric, and everybody listens to it. And to have interfered with her silences would have been a crime.
Well, I can't possibly leave you with that. It's far too moving. So I've got one more clip, a longer clip that I'd like to play to finish with. This is Piers from 2007. Remember, he's talking to an international audience here. I say that because he's talking about, part of this is about Charles Parker and the radio ballads, about which we all know, but he couldn't necessarily assume that when he was talking to his audience at the Purcell Room, which is where most of these lectures took place. So this is Piers also talking about, this is the reason it's carefully crafted, this little presentation of mine. He's talking about Beckett and he's talking about a certain radio ballad. So there's, there's a certain way of looking forward to the rest of the afternoon here. This is Piers talking in 2007 in a talk called Does Sound Matter?
Beckett was a great radio writer. Of course, he's a great theatre writer, but he understood silence and space. He was very dictatorial working in the studio in radio because he would insist that the silences were absolutely timed. So he would cut in yellow leader rather than have space. So there would be a complete blank at moments in the play. Beckett is often written off as a kind of pessimist, gloomy old bird, which indeed he can be. But he's also extremely funny. And I'd like to quote something that one of our contemporary writers wrote about him. Conor Macpherson wrote about Beckett. He's an Irish pagan who sought to celebrate the infinite mystery and endurance of the human heart through public rituals. Well, it's an ambitious aim, but that's what I like to try and do in radio, and what I particularly love. The infinite mystery and endurance of the human heart through public rituals. And this business of the heart must be at the centre, I think. However clever, however technically brilliant, if you're not touched as a human being by what you hear or see, then you might as well give it up. Well, almost. There are one or two things that are just fun for fun's sake. But generally, I think the human heart needs to be touched. My small grandson, who's only, he was 4 when he said this, and I'm quoting him everywhere now, he said to me, "Grandpa, in life there are 2 things, counting and guessing." Well, really, that's all you need to say about life. The counting bit we can all do. It's the guessing bit that's the interesting bit, and which I think as sound makers we need to concentrate on. Things that we don't even quite know are happening till they happen. One more quote from a painter this time, Henri Matisse. He writes, or wrote, "I find myself driven forward by an idea which I can really only grasp little by little as it grows with the picture." I used to feel that a lot about making radio programs. I work mainly in documentaries, but sometimes in drama, that as you put the pieces together like a mosaic, the colour was important, but a pattern emerged. A story was told that you weren't expecting perhaps when you started off. And I think the idea of having an idea at the centre, something that has a real thought behind it, is very, very crucial. Words do a lot. Words don't do everything. There's a BBC tendency, I think, to concentrate on words. We are, and I worked for the BBC, we are the great wordsmiths. I love words. I think in the end they're the shortest cut to meaning. But there are times when you don't need words. And it's that blending of words and no words, music, sound, speech. Some of you will have heard of the BBC radio ballads. There were 3 people really involved in that. A producer called Charles Parker, Ewan MacColl, and Peggy Seeger, who of course comes from a great folk singing tradition. And they created something called the radio ballads, and I'd like to play you a bit from the last of the ballads, which is about travelling people, gypsies, tinkers, people of the road. And I think it's pretty remarkable that this is a huge mosaic of a way of life that struggles on, but has always had difficulties. So a little bit from the travelling people.
It starts off when you go to school, you seem to be frightened of something. There's always somebody seems to be chasing you.
My mother said I never should play with the gypsies in the wood.
My mother said I never should play with the gypsies.
We're sick of it. We're hounding the same as Hitler hounded the Jews.
In some parts of Perthshire, they would think more of a dumb animal, a beast in the field, a cattle beast, as they do of a tinker.
You know, because we're gypsies, is there any harm of us going in a beer shop getting served with a pint of beer? And near enough every beer shop, no gypsies are allowed.
A dog's life. It is. Proper dog's life.
Some houses you would go to would put the dog, if they saw you coming, before ever they heard what you wanted.
Some people chase you away as if you were an animal.
Just treat you as if you were animals, as if you'd 7 lives. And it was just opposite the doctor's house there. So they take him into the doctor. But the doctor wouldn't hear a word of him getting inside his surgery. He was a tinker and he had to go to the garage. So they took my father and stretched him out on the garage floor. It was a nautical day. And he says, "Oh," he says, "this man's dead." The doctor says, "I can't do nothing for him." My mother was standing there greeting for me in her arms. He was just Tinker Donald McGregor. And that was the end of it.
Tinky, tinky, tinker, where was you born? In among the tatties where your breeks are torn.
Tinker, oh tinker, cover your face. You're no a paid-up member of the human race.
And I think all radio makers in Britain look back to that series of ballads with respect and interest, and really great admiration when you think it was all done with fairly primitive equipment. In fact, the mixes were all done live with singers, a live band there. Beautiful voices, and almost the first time in radio that the voices of the people were let in. Because before that, the practice was for recordings to be done of factory workers, gypsies, whatever, but then actors were given the text and reinterpreted it, which of course is not the same thing at all. And the rhythm and beauty of those voices and their hauntings and their possibilities and their dreams, which can only be realised, I think, by the person, him or herself, which is why I love documentaries. The ballad in English has many meanings, and I'm not sure in your various languages whether it has the same. It's a song, it's a dance, it's history, it's a narrative,
It somehow puts together a whole lot of human experience in a simple form, and that was what Parker, McColl and Seeger were after, to gather working people's life into a tapestry, really, in a way that could be grasped and imagined.
So there it is, the Charles Parker coming in at the end of the last of the extracts I want to play you, fittingly by Piers Plowright. Do use this archive. I hope you'll visit it. It will grow as the year goes on. It should be complete by the end of the year. And I hope, as Larry Sider and the team at the School of Sound hope, it will be a useful resource. Piers and I were in daily contact in the last months of his life by letter, email, and when he went into the hospice shortly before he died, mostly by telephone every day. And shortly before he died, he sent me a poem which he'd written and which he very kindly dedicated to me. And I'd like to just briefly end with this poem because I think it kind of sums up a lot of what I've been talking about and what Piers has been talking about. It's called Rhyming. Gather some words from the tree of facts. Meanings are easy. It's the flood of colour and dream that takes longer. So raise your hats, ladies and gents, to the dreamers and the painters, the poets who fill in the maps of our slow days. Behind every silence, 1,000 sounds. Under every space, a forest to be sown. And that silence that isn't really a silence at all, because while our ears may do the hearing, our minds are doing the listening. The grain of the voice, the pause between words that contains memory, emotion, regret, pain, love, anger. The tiny sound that, because it's surrounded by stillness, becomes huge. Or the tiny sound that somehow survives the din of the world and rises to the surface to speak to us. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
I'm going to cue the Peggy video first. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean. Another round of applause. Wonderful stuff. And you've cued us up well. Thank you for doing that by referencing the Travelling People, which I think you said was 60 years old this year, the last of those original radio ballads. And so in our next session, we're going to reflect on the making of that ballad a little bit more and how it gave a voice to the travellers, of course interviewed by Charles, by Ewan McColl and by Peggy Seeger. And then we're going to move on to see how this community has been represented in the media between then and now. So in a very short moment, we're going to be hearing a talk from Peter Cox. Peter is the author of the book Set in Song, which is the definitive book about those radio ballads. He's going to talk a little bit about the story of the making of that legendary radio programme. But first, we're going to hear from one of the creative team who collected all the actuality material for the programme, and the Radio Ballad's musical director. Of course, that's Peggy Seeger.
One of my most memorable experiences of recording Travellers was Maggie Cameron in her little bow tent. Well, it wasn't little, it was quite large. It was probably about 20 or 30 feet across. And she had an upturned bucket in the middle of the room with a hole in the top of the tent for the smoke to go out. And we all sat around as close as we could to the fire. She was like something out of a fairy tale. She had very wild white hair, and everybody in that tent sat on the ground. They put something underneath themselves because it was bare ground. Although it's possible that there were old carpets that they put there to sit on. And everyone was either cross-legged or they had their feet out in front of them. But Maggie, she must have been about maybe 60 or 70, but she looked about 90. And it was like something out of the Middle Ages. Men and the children stayed quiet. Everybody else stayed quiet. And the old woman just took over. I have a feeling that an awful lot of the traveler communities were matriarchal because the women seemed to carry the songs. And Maggie had songs and she had stories. And she, as I said, something out of the Middle Ages.
Here are Ewan and Peggy, not long after they'd been brought together by the American folklorist Alan Lomax at the famous folk festival at Newport in Rhode Island. And this, next, this is Charles Parker recording an interview with a Scottish fisherman for Singing the Fishing in 1959. That was the high point of the radio ballads when they won the Prix Italia. By the time they were ready for Travelling People, they knew it would be the last radio ballad. The series had been axed. As Ewan rather sourly said, but accurately, a radio ballad costs about as much as an hour of wrestling, fake wrestling, on Sunday afternoon on ITV. Next. Here is the studio setup for the first of the radio ballads, with Charles supervising in standard issue folk revival check shirt, and Peggy at 22 in the centre, conducting the musicians with the neck of her banjo. You have to imagine that Charles, in his cubbyhole of an office, cutting mag tape on the angle with a razor blade and then hanging them up on a washing line he had suspended in this pokey room so that when the door opened, they didn't fly everywhere. This here is a diagram of the studio setup they eventually settled on for the third and all subsequent radio ballads. Above them in the control room at the top on the first floor are Charles, the studio manager John Clark, and Gillian Ford on grams feeding in the sound effects. Down below, Peggy on dais on the left is conducting the singers and musicians all around, while at the bottom is Alan Ward on this machine, a little rectangle laconically labelled TR90, which was a tape machine which was absolutely enormous, about 9 foot tall, bringing in the actuality on cue. And everything was live and everything had to be spot on. And there was take after take. In the boxing, the 7th one, Peggy told me that there were 87 different takes for a 14-minute piece. Next. This is a wonderful piece of that actuality, the story told by Maggie Cameron to a crowd of 20 more travellers in an old bow tent. This is a bow tent about a quarter the size, but as you recall, Peggy said it was about 20 feet long.
Because round the firesides, the old people used to tell them stories.
Well, we're standing as close as where Alec's sitting there. And I wished fella. They were up at this waste big old place. They called it Barachalden. But Mary and her father that night when they were there, they'd all went to bed. They'd been sitting killing away to the last hour, Mary said. But all on a sudden, she heard pipes coming. And she turned round and she said to her father, I'd advise, she says, father, to put out the light. Because she says, this is some of the drunk travellers coming from Oban. And she says, if you keep the lights on, you will be bothered to death all night and will never be able to rise in the morning. I never saw the likes of you, says Mary. Never in my life. Well, she says, when folks drunk, you didn't want to be bothered with them. You can't be carrying on with the pipes all night. God will no give us the privilege of getting our eyes closed. So our old father obeyed and he put out the light. Every one of them kept beautiful new tents of their own. But Mary, she heard the pipes coming nearer and nearer and nearer till they come walking right into the camp. And Mary said with the water that she'd drained on the fire, the wind was just blowing, just trying to make a coal light. But she says, I left at the side of the door And I look at it, Maggie, and as sure as God's in the kingdom of heaven, she says, I nearly jumped out of the bed. My heart went quicker, she says, an attraction engine. There was 2 wee men, and there wouldn't be as tall, she says, as my Cairn Terrier, with curled up shoes on them, and picket bonnets, long whiskers on them, and the size of their arm, she says, was like just the length of your hand. 2 sets of pipes, and they kept going in time round the fire and round the fire, one reel after another. And she says, I was even feared to blow breath. And they kept us walking, she says, till God sent the first streak of light in the morning before they disappeared.
Next. Here now are 2 final extracts from travelling people in the last section of the ballad over an image of a boy riding a horse at the famous annual Appleby Horse Fair gathering that Ewan and Peggy were smuggled into. The satire of the song, "The Gypsy is a Gentleman," is exemplified by the only time in the entire radio ballad series they used an oboe. Next.
I mean, we're fed up with gypsies living in our area. We're sick to death of them.
Vagrants, filthy, dirty people. I object to calling them gypsies. Nothing but lazy people.
I would say the gypsy was a gentleman. These people are not.
Oh, the gypsy is a gentleman and he always knows his place. He never troubles anyone and rarely shows his face. He knows the ways of nature, he's reticent and shy, and never pesters gorgios to sell or yet to buy.
And the wind is on the heath, and the heath is far away from towns and private property where decent people stay.
And that's a snatch of the last of the 65 original songs that Ewan wrote for the Radio Ballad series, many of whom have gone unnoticed into the folk canon. And finally, we hear a Birmingham alderman decrying the mess the gypsies made. Next.
How far does it come in your mind before you say, I have done everything I possibly can, and I will help the broad mass of these people, but there are some I can do nothing with whatever? Then doesn't the time arise in one's mind when one has to say, all right, one has to exterminate the impossibles? I know all that leads to in one's mind. Nazism, who is it next? The gypsies, the tinkers, the Jews, the coloured man. I don't accept that really on these particular
people. I
people.
don't think exterminate's a terrible word. You can't really mean that.
Why not?
Charles Parker grew up during those 8 radio ballads. He began as a fearful, not necessarily timorous, but he and I just learned so much during those. And the traveling people was especially interesting because at the beginning, as I pointed out in my book, Charles thought the gypsies were dirty, the travelers were dirty. He would not drink out of anything that was served to him at the beginning of that, in a traveler's house or a gypsy's. And by the end of doing the radio ballads, Charles was the person that you knew. You didn't know the Charles that began. I did. Yeah. And to be able to change yourself like that in between your roughly about 45 years old to your 60s or whenever he died was an amazing thing for someone to do.
Those words, exterminate and then why not, that end quote is quite terrifying. That wasn't the original ending of the programme, but Ewan persuaded Charles of the raw power as a summary of what travellers faced every day of their lives. And it's the only time, note, in 8 hours of radio ballad that the interviewer's voice is left in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. Brilliant. We were hoping to be able to welcome here Charles Parker's daughter, Sarah, who many of you may know, to talk to us about a programme she's made called The Tinker Experiment. Now, Sarah can't be here in person, but we are going to hear from her on the video.
People used to sing that little rhyme, tinky, tinky.
Torn bags go to the well and wash your rags.
You know, dirty bags go to the well and wash your rags and stuff like that. So there was always this notion that because you were living in very rudimentary conditions that you were dirty.
I mean, this rubbish about you don't wash, even if it's cold water and icy cold water and soap, you still wash.
So, you know, being the only knacking or gypsy traveller kid in the class, they wouldn't sit beside me, they wouldn't dance with me at Christmas dances, they wouldn't choose me to be on a team when we were playing sports. I was always left to last.
Really sorry that I can't make the day. But I want to tell you about a programme that I made which is really relevant to the travelling people, and it was only last year. It was for a series I was doing called History on the Edge, which was about the stories that have fallen through the cracks of history. Untold, I suppose, because people never had a voice. And as you know, Charles always wanted to give people a voice, and I'm the same. Anyway, this story is about something that's become known as the Tinker Experiment, and it was set up after the Second World War by the Scottish government, who wanted to integrate gypsy travellers into the settled community. The aim was to provide accommodation and to give children a chance of education. You know, if they didn't go to school, though, for 200 days a year, they could be taken into care. They used to call the charity officers that came to collect the children cruelty men. So what does that tell you? Anyway, the accommodation itself was substandard. I mean, at Bobbin Mill, which was the first site that I went to, it was in old prisoner of war huts, which were divided into tiny, cramped spaces with walls made with asbestos partitions, you know. Anyway, my first visit, I went on my own. People are obviously quite suspicious, you know. I turn up and want to record, and I did a lot of recording then with Seamus McPhee and his sister Rosanna. They still live there. The family still live there because they've got nowhere to go. I think as a producer, you feel, and as interviewer, when you record people, you feel a great responsibility to tell their stories and hope that attitudes will change. And I know that my father did. I mean, the only time you ever hear his voice is at the end of The Travelling People.
The McPhees all did very well at school, despite everything. Going on to study at university, to postgraduate level with Rosanna, Bridget and Isabella all qualifying as teachers, while Seamus had hoped to work as a translator.
And this education has been a waste of time. And if this was an experiment to try and educate us so we'd fit in and be socially integrated in the community, it's failed dismally. We can't take professional friends here. They won't come here. Look at the state of the place. I had relationships, and the minute they found out where I lived, that was it. Never heard again.
I mean, that's just heartbreaking.
I know. Well, we all thought, because we came from a big family, that we all had the notion we would get married and have children. And because we were educated out of the culture. So travelling men didn't want women that had gone to university and were working in the settled community. Didn't want that.
You don't fit into either culture.
And there are no children here.
Well, I think that's the main thing. You know, not just personally that we never got married and had children, but I think it's very sad to think, you know, that all the culture that was there is lost, the culture being so decimated through making sure that they were in this no man's land, that nobody wanted you.
While we were recording this programme, I'm sad to report that one of the McPhee brothers died. Chick had been a much-loved, talented piper all his life. He won prizes at the Highland Games. And one of his favourite tunes, The Mist-Covered Mountains, was played at his funeral.
That's what he did.
It's a lament, it's a, you know, like an elegy.
And so if a piper comes to your door, you know, it forebodes a death in the family. And that's why we only play it, really, at funerals, don't we? But you know, you feel guilty every day that you let your parents down, that you didn't get married, you didn't have children, you didn't carry on the line.
This is where the fact that I'm never on the presenting side of the glass will become very apparent to the whole room. Do we need to hold on, Andy, for a moment for the live stream before we carry on? They can still hear you. Can they? Yeah. Oh gosh, right, be careful. This is Peter. Say hello to Peter.
Hello.
Peter. Doing a great job. This is your nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolute nightmare. Yeah. Right, shall we carry on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So to finish off this section of the session, I'd like you to welcome two more guests. So I'm going to be joined by Rich Matthews from Rural Media. So Rural Media work a lot with travellers and also publish the Travellers Times. And I'm also going to be joined, hello Rich, by filmmaker Lisa Smith. Please make them very welcome. Hello, how are you? Would you like to sit down? Would you like to sit down or stand up?
I'm right, standing.
We're going to stand. Shall I? Am I in your way?
No, you're
okay. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very, very much for being here, both of you. So, Rick, tell us what you... Give us what do you do at Rural Media? Tell us what you do.
So I'm head of development at Rural Media, which is a media charity and production company. And we've run the Travellers Times project and magazine and website for over 20 years now, isn't it? My involvement from that is I've done various different roles within it, but one of those was we made a Heritage Lottery Fund project called Searching for the Travelling People, which was exploring and reacting to Charles Parker, Hugh McColl's and Peggy Seeger's work and exploring what we would do, what it meant now. Then it would have been, we weren't quite on an anniversary, but it was 55 odd years after. But the question I get asked the most in relation to that project is, and I think it's, you said it in your introduction, Kelly, which was what's changed in theory. Now, actually, I had a prepared answer, but listening to the extract of the ballad in Piers Plowright's lecture about how the daughter talking about her father not being let into the doctors and having been taken to the garage reminded me of an experience I had just this week. So Travellers Times often gets approached to give to vet opinions or research or documentaries or programmes about travellers in general. And we have received one approach from the NHS, who are putting together a new set of guidelines to do quick TikTok-length videos to try and get communities that they felt didn't readily access screening on numerous health benefits. Now, I oversee the Travellers Times project, but don't directly run it. That's done by Liza Mortimer, a really incredible woman who's just doing brilliant work at the moment. So I was guilty of joining the Zoom, not having done the homework, and not having read the questions that the guidelines that they wanted to run. So I'm all smiles and it's all nice, and and we're going through, and Liza's being very professional, very controlled, but there was tension, and I was unsure why. So I start scrolling through as they're talking through these guidelines, and they've got numerous subsets of communities and people, disabled people, neurodiversity, so on and so forth. And I don't find travellers. I don't understand. Have I not got the relevant piece? And then I come to the bottom, and there's BAME. Now, which is already a term which has fallen out of favour, and people prefer ethnic minorities, or I mean, I'm not even sure I'm up to speed on the current preferred nomenclature for that. But I said, so I interrupted and said, you've got BAME on here, and I would, are you including travellers as an ethnic minority under that group? He said, oh, no. I said, oh, okay, I don't understand. Where are they on this form? I mean, we're already talking about a massive communities and a variety of people being sort of regularly reduced to one bracket. And he goes, oh, it's under transient. I said, what? Transient? He said, well, what else is under transient? Homeless people? He said, yes. I said, so you're asking us to advocate for your new NHS guidelines, which take a pejorative view and assumes that an ethnic minority, a culture of great variety and passion and depth, and just that dates back hundreds, thousands of years in this country, is a lifestyle choice, and one which is seen as fringe of society. And he blushed, and that's my example of, it's a different version, but it is the same prejudice. The positive answer I can give, which I'd rather focus on, is my own experience, because I don't like talking particularly about trying to represent travellers in Romani and Roma people, because I'm not. I'm a Gorger. But my own experience interestingly mirrored what was just said by Peggy, who I had the privilege of meeting, about Charles himself. And it was also echoed by when I met Sarah as well, and for doing our documentary about it. I had my own set of opinions. While I wouldn't describe it as prejudice, I describe it as ignorant, which is the most common thing. And through my work with Travellers' Times and with Searching for the Travelling People in particular, my attitudes about what needed to be done and the balance of power specifically changed dramatically. So the one thing we have control over in this world is our own actions and our own words, and hopefully they correspond. So because of my involvement with Travellers' Times, and specifically going top to tail in the country and forming our own ballad off the back of Charles Ewan's and Peggy's work, was that we are now in the process, the very end, of making Travellers' Times an independent, traveller-run, owned, operated media platform, which will be the first of its kind. But instrumentally, because of that project, knowing the one truth, the one difference that is there, is media is being democratised, and if you're in a position to upskill and empower, you can, and that's hopefully what we've done.
Brilliant, amazing, thank you. And fingers crossed, we may be able to see a clip of Searching for the Travelling People, fingers crossed. So, Lisa, tell us about you, what you're working on at the moment, and a bit about you.
Okay, hello. I wasn't expecting to talk, and so you take me by a little bit of surprise, but it's lovely to be here with you all today, and lovely to see your presentation in particular. I really enjoyed with those clips. So my name's Lisa Smith. I'm a Romani traveller. I'm from Worcestershire. I'm also curator of the International Festival of Romani Film, and have a production company called Patron Films, and it's one of the first female-led Romani film production companies in the UK. So a lot has changed since the 1950s Charles Parker ballad, but one thing that hasn't changed, I guess, is the lack of self-representation in mainstream media, and this is still a big issue. And I think there are many stories to be told, but not as many opportunities from people from the community to be able to be actively telling them. And what we see time and time again, actually, is we all know, which is miles away from the work of Charles Parker, but Channel 4 documentaries that sensationalise the community and don't present a very authentic picture, I would say. So with these as well, what we try to push back on is productions being made about our community, but with no person from the community actually part of that production team or part of creating that narrative. And that's the most important thing for us. And at the moment, actually, I know I was in conversation with Tony a while ago, because also I've worked on Travellers' Times for a long time as a journalist, and it's a brilliant project, and I actually took part in searching for the travelling people. This was my first contact with the Charles Parker archive, actually, was going down to Birmingham Archive and realising that there is this beautiful content of my ancestors available and not knowing anything about that before. So it really opened my eyes to what exists in the archive. And I have nothing for admiration for the team who collected those back in the 1950s and 60s. And then for a long time, I had in the back of my mind how important these pieces of, how important these radio ballads are, how important these voices are of our ancestors. And then since then, I started to develop an archival documentary that I hope could include the voices of the travelling people from the Charles Parker archive, and then just oppose that with archival footage of Romanian traveller people in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, because it's never been done before by us. And so that's a big step for us as a community to go forward and do that. But we're very much here, we're very much alive, despite this also romanticised version of us in a bygone era with the beautiful wagons, which we still cherish in our hearts. But we're a contemporary community facing contemporary and real issues still. And I think the stigma never really went away. But more and more again, we're coming out of the shadows to take our stake, I suppose, and not being so quiet anymore. We're making a bit more fuss, I suppose, about wanting to speak for ourselves. Yeah. So I hope that made sense.
You did it so wonderfully eloquently. Thank you. And just you hadn't prepared a word of that. I'm in awe. That's brilliant. So where are you up to with the project, and what's your vision for it, timeline, and so on? Are you that far on with it yet?
So it's in early development right now, edging on towards pre-production. We've done a lot of research in terms of like archives video-based and what exists. A lot of this is owned by people like Getty Images and British Pathé. So really just analysing with an archive producer what's there. And then the next step is to be more in contact with the Charles Archive, Parker Archive, and really to get really deep into that and explore more of the voices that exist in that. And the plan is to create a narrative that's purely spoken by the travelling people. So it will be one story consistently, but based on the actual stories, the actual voices that exist from the archive, I would hope. So, yeah.
It doesn't mention the fact she's also secured funding, and it was the BFI you got it for that film.
Yeah, we
which is, as we know, a massive
very
challenge.
hard thing to do.
Very hard thing to do. Yeah. What was that experience like? Applying for funding, trying to get funding to do a project.
Yeah. I think one of the difficult things sometimes is if you the type of stories I want to tell, it's difficult to connect with other people from my background in the industry because there aren't so many producers, film directors from our community. Like, we're very underrepresented in the film industry. And so the first step is to build a team on board who actually believe in that story that you want to tell and can invest energy and commitment to that and believe in that. So that was the first step, really. But this short is funded by Film Wales in collaboration with BBC Wales. It's based on my grand story around the 1950s, and it's about the stopping places that exist in South Wales and the erasure of these stopping places over time. And actually it features folk music, and it reflects a little bit about her experience at that time when she was much younger. And I actually will visit her this weekend because she's not well. Unfortunately, she's just been diagnosed with cancer. And so it feels like now more important than ever to start to preserve those memories and those stories. And that's why I think the archive here is so special in that it managed to capture that, for future generations to understand where they come from and how their ancestors were living at that time. So we're very grateful to have that. Yeah.
And what about you, Rich? What's next? What's your next project? What's in the pipeline?
Well, there's rural media is one of our strengths, and also it makes it very hard for me to say what we're doing, which is we do lots of things. In terms of working with Travellers Times, my priority at the moment is making sure that transition's happening, because in the same way that you say it's hard to get funded, obviously when Travellers Times becomes independent, they become new and therefore can't be readily invested in, even though they'll be taking the brand and all that content, all that archive forward. So one of the things that I'm navigating at the moment is the complexities of, can we essentially act as guarantors as the charity so that they can have a year or more of independent operation and then qualify and have all the accounts and all the legal documents. So that's one of my main focuses there. I mean, it's both working on anything to do with, for instance, I recently decided to drop the word gypsy when I say it now, because it's been still a very live conversation. I know in the context of Charles Parker's work and that's one of the times that the word traveller became more foregrounded. But while it's still accepted and used, self-identified by many travellers, and that's totally fine. For me, I've just come across enough travellers that it's sensitive for, and so that's again my own internal personal thing about. So I'm trying to say Romany, Roma, and traveller, but even that is reductive, and that's part of it for me is that understanding that when you start talking about Irish travellers and you start talking about showmen and boatmen and all the subsets, and each of those subsets is not enough in and of itself, and there's an incredible depth of culture and history which deserves to be celebrated, and not focusing on a subset of negative preconceptions, which if you go in with preconceptions, we've all done it, they tend to get reinforced. And I've had a very privileged experience, and I know that, the same in many ways that Peggy had and talked about, where because I was working with people from the communities in question and was able to go in there and have open, frank conversations, and they, to some degree, earned trust. To me, the racism that still occurs, it's obvious. But the hard fight is still exactly what Lisa said, which is that there's still an element of hiding in plain sight, because it is still the last bastion of acceptable racism. And frankly, in this day and age, it's time for that to end. Just because you choose to be a nomad, because not every traveller is, there's a huge settled community. And so our hope is that we will continue, because we've done a lot of work in this area, to work with the Independent Travellers Times, to work with people like Lisa, and hopefully do more work in the area. Interestingly enough, coming full circle, increasingly more, we're very film and visual media focused, but we're doing more and more podcasts, because it's very much in vogue, and it's it's reinvigorating that whole...
Plug your commissioners. Speak to your commissioners. They're here.
Yeah. So that it's definitely a very fertile way of an emotive method, and that's the main thing. I think that the clip about space, about the silence, that was so much more profoundly moving, wasn't it? Because of the silence, and that's why I'm a fan of podcasts, because it reintroduced long form, open, roomy audio and conversation, and that for me is key.
Thank you both. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Rich. Big round of applause for Lisa and Rich. Thank you. We will bring you the clip of the film later on if we can. We're just going to have a short break while we try and just Google it. What are they Googling? Searching for the travelling people.
Or alternatively, go to Travellers Times itself and get the hits
there you go.
Website, and you can find it there.
How long's the break, Andy?
Well, she's arrived actually, so we might.
Tea break now then.
Is tea available down there? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So we'll take a tea break now.
Okay.
10 minutes, okay. Grab a cup of tea.
And then we'll
Try
resume.
and reboot the system and try and get it working.
Okay. Well done. Whoops. Welcome back from our impromptu tea break. Just so that you know, we're going to run on till just before 4 o'clock, and then there won't be a tea break, and we'll go to the breakout sessions. So welcome back. I'm very pleased to report, thanks to an amazing effort by Peter and by Paul, If only we had a Mary, we'd be proper revivalist tech crew. But thank you very much. Happy to report we're going to pick up exactly where we left off and see the clip of the film that Rich was talking about earlier. So let's see the extract from Searching for the Travelling People.
When we arrived in this country, around about 1450, people thought we were Egyptian. So, and people in Western Europe thought we were Egyptian as well, so we got called the people from Little Egypt, hence Gypsy for short. And over 500 years we've become used to that, and the English language being what it is, that word got exported all over the world as well, and we've become known as gypsies all over the world. Gypsies began arriving in this country about 500 years ago, and they're still arriving today. We've been actually in Darlington for 200 years. Checks out great-great-grandfather wrote out. I mean, we've got written evidence of being here for 200 years. But yet there's still that misconception that we've just arrived and we're society's dropouts. But we're not. We go much deeper than that. We have a very ancient culture, very ancient language, very ancient traditions. We didn't always move from country to country because of persecution. Sometimes we were economic migrants. We're better organised these days, and our technology's played a big part in that. The internet and Facebook and mobile phones and things, and where we would not see each other or hear from each other except for every Appleby or certain fairs. Now we're constantly in touch and we can organise ourselves better.
So I just want to say thanks again to Rich and to Lisa and to Peter and Sarah on a video, and of course to Peggy Seeger. It was great to hear from her too. So I suppose all of this begs the question, would the BBC commission the radio ballads today? So in 2006, my company we were commissioned to create that set of radio ballads, and we also did some around the London Olympics in 2012 and for the First World War centenaries in 2014 to 18. But they were quite different. They were for Radio 2. Would Radio 4 commission a radio ballad feature programme? So we're going to ask Hugh Levinson from Radio 4, commissioning editor, the Factual Programmes, who is here. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you. Hello. Hello. Am I on? Is that working? Yeah, marvellous. So being here on Charles Parker Day and being asked this question, will we commission it? It's so tempting just to say no and leave the room very hastily, just for the lols. But a little bit more seriously, I mean, one thing we started at Radio, we're about to start at Radio 4 in 2 weeks, is a new weekly slot, which is partly inspired by the Radio Ballads, which is a real producers, feature makers slot, weekly slot, 28 weeks a year, and I'm busy commissioning stuff for that now. So in one sense, the answer is, a very simple yes, that's what that slot is there for. But what I do think about it, and reflecting on it, is not only was the Charles Parker trying to do something, trying to bring stories that hadn't been heard before, but he was right at the boundaries of what was technologically possible. And even beyond the boundaries of what was technologically possible when you look at that studio setup. So I think the combination, I think people think of it in a nostalgic way, but to try and think of it as a forward-thinking way is really interesting. That's what the thing that will be coming to us now. It might be something involving AI, it might be something involving an emerging technology that we haven't heard of. We just think, that's impossible, you can't do that, let's do it. And I think that's what it would be. It wouldn't be the Radio Ballads. It would be something else, something new. And that's what people like, inspired by that sort of sensibility, would bring. I'd also say it depends on what it was the ballad of. Not all great producers have great ideas. Not all great artists write great books or make great pictures. So actually, what is the subject? What would it be? So it's not in the abstract, it's in the particular, I think, is a really important thing. The budgets that were mentioned, so there's a deep in-sucking of breath through the teeth. But what I would say is a lot of ideas you get, the problem isn't the ambition, the problem is they're not ambitious enough. And that's really something that struck me. And I think if you need the money, there's always a way of finding the money. If it's a really, really great idea, if it's a ho-hum idea and it's really expensive, then the budget is a problem. If it's a great idea, then somehow, the money will be there. So I think having said that, this is an open door for the Charles Parkers, the Charlene Parkers, and everybody else of this world to pitch. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Hugh. And you'll get a chance to chat to Hugh and ask some questions about commissioning, about ideas at the Selling Ideas session across the square at 4 o'clock. And he'll be alongside Matthew Dodds and Tammy Walker as well from Radio 4. So we look forward to that. Right, as you know, Charles Parker is most known, but very well known for giving a voice to ordinary people. What some of you might not know about Charles is that he actually did a lot of work in prisons, lecturing for the WEA, the Workers' Educational Association. Current chair of the Charles Parker Trust, who we met earlier, Phil, is also the chief executive of the Prison Radio Association. So next, he's going to lead a fascinating session about a Samuel Beckett radio play that's being staged at HMP Liverpool, just down the road, and also exploring the parallels between these two pioneers of radio, Samuel Beckett and Charles Parker. So please welcome back Phil Maguire.
It's me, I'm back. Hello. Oh, take a seat, I'm going to introduce you. I'm going to say nice things about you. You can try. Here we are. I'm delighted to be back. It's going well, isn't it? Thanks, Kelly, for the introduction. Yes, I am Phil Maguire. I'm a radio producer, a broadcaster. I'm chief executive of the Prison Radio Association, and as you know, it's my privilege to be the chair of the Charles Parker Trust. Today, we have an extraordinary discussion lined up that bridges the worlds of two iconic figures in the realms of art and radio, two giants, Samuel Beckett and Charles Parker. I'm delighted to be joined for this conversation by all of you, of course, but also by Dr. Eleanor Liebeck, Senior Lecturer in Literature at the Institute of Irish Studies and the Department of English here at the University of Liverpool. Ellie, welcome to this session, but also, again, thank you very much for hosting us here and for making us all feel so welcome.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Also with us is Simon Ruding. Simon is Director of TIP, Theatre in Prisons and Probation, an organisation committed to the idea that the participatory arts have the power to transform people's lives for the better. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you very much indeed.
So Ellie and Simon are collaborating on a really fascinating project. They're staging a Samuel Beckett radio play, Roughs for Radio 2 is its name, inside HMP Liverpool, with a group of people that live in that prison. Ellie, to start us off, could you share a bit about the genesis of the project? Why are you doing this? What inspired you to take Beckett into a prison, especially through a radio play?
Yeah, thank you so much, Phil. And really, I mean, there are two of us here, but there are three parts to this collaboration. And the third part is the theatre company run by the actor Adrian Dunbar, who's best known for Line of Duty, who actually runs Unreal Cities, which is the company responsible for the Samuel Beckett Festival, which we've been hosting here at Liverpool for the past few years. And when Adrian and the company were thinking with us about relaunching that festival after COVID, they wanted to think about Beckett very much in that post-COVID context. So the idea of Beckett's long fascination with confinement and also with ideas of liberation in Beckett's work. So thinking in this year's festival, as we're going to be doing, about the idea of Beckett Unbound, the idea of freeing the body in space, it seemed very sensible to be looking at Beckett's radio work, thinking about the voice, thinking about how the voice signifies the kind of body freed in space. And then we knew that we wanted to pick up on that legacy of Beckett's work in prison, which we might talk a little bit more about in a minute. And that's when I approached Simon, and it's been fantastic to work with Tip.
Well, Simon, then.
Yeah.
Beautiful segue. I'd like to understand how and why you got involved. Beckett's writing, who dares to define what Beckett's writing is? Beckett's writing is many things, but dare I say it's known for being bleak, hard to understand, inaccessible. Why do you think that staging one of his radio plays will work in a prison setting?
Okay, yes to all of those things. I think is generally the sort of common interpretation of Beckett's work, and people commonly will see it in that way. And I think what intrigued me when we were approached was that the majority of work that I do is about giving people voice and giving them an opportunity to tell their own stories. So a lot of my work as a participatory artist is working with people to enable them to tell their stories, the stories that they're interested in telling. And from time to time, we take on commissions such as this to work specifically around key issues or with script. And there's something about Beckett's work which attracted me because of the obsession and fascination he has around confinement and around imprisonment and restriction. And of course, he plays with that with language, but thematically, it is unbelievably strong in his work. So a couple of years ago, we did some taster workshops in Liverpool with some men and in HMP Liverpool, and they were responded to really positively. So this is a nice next step.
So tell me about Godot.
Okay, so I'm going to get the pronunciation of this prison incorrect. Okay, so Godot was first performed, Waiting for Godot, the most famous Beckett piece, was first performed in 1953 in Paris. And it was received fairly negatively, I think it would be fair to say. Dismally is one of the words which is regularly attached to
Was it actually booed off the stage? Was it, or was it?
There were, I led to believe there were, there were some boos. And it was in French. And 8 months later was translated into German and was performed by German men in prison in Lutzhagen, I think it was called, Lutzhagen prison. And it received a standing ovation from the men in the audience. They couldn't understand how he knew so much about prison whilst having never been in prison. And so thematically, I've been coming at some of this work around Beckett with people in prison from the idea of what is it that Beckett knows about prison that the rest of us don't.
And they said, so that the audience that gave him a standing ovation in a prison in Germany said, how does he know us?
Yes.
How does he know who we are?
Yes.
He had an instinctive understanding for the circumstances and the experiences of people that are incarcerated.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Briefly, why? So the play's called Roughs for Radio. Why this one?
Well, I think the fact that it's called Roughs for Radio kind of actually belies the fact that it's a very finely wrought piece of work and a very carefully constructed piece of audio work. Beckett was an innovator with sound. His commissions for the third programme changed the way that the BBC produced drama, but also produced audio work in a much broader sense. His work with the sort of emerging radiophonic workshop, for instance, which there's a lovely connection with Simon as well, and Delia, Derbyshire, really transformed the ways in which people thought that they could use the radio. And I mean, that followed on from what he was doing with Godot, which people understood was, jettisoning everything.
Why Roughs for Radio?
Why Roughs for Radio? Because it restages, so it reimagines incarceration and interrogation. And we've talked a lot about the ethics of working on something like this with men in prison. But something that's always really heartened me, talking to Simon, is when you've spoken about those improvisational exercises you so often do with the men in prison, one of the first scenarios they launch themselves at, they leap to, is a police interrogation, because it's something that they're familiar with.
Absolutely, that structure is really, really strong. And it's worthwhile just picking up before you move on. Another aspect of this, you mentioned Delia Derbyshire there, of course, who BBC Radiophonic Workshop. She was also a prison reformer, did a lot of work in prison reform. So there was another angle to this, which I found really, really fascinating. And I'm based at the University of Manchester, and the university's drama department holds the Delia Derbyshire archive. So there was a sort of lovely triangulation. It's one of those things, when everything comes together, it was impossible for me to say, no, we're not going to do it, Ellie.
We are here today at the Charles Parker Day, of course, and it's an annual event that celebrates his work and his legacy. And Charles Parker was many things. He was a submarine commander. How many of you knew that? He was a pioneer of radio and broadcasting and oral history. He was an inspiring lecturer in prisons, no less. And he was a folk musician and a political campaigner. One of his most significant contributions was to place real value on what ordinary people had to say. So I imagine, therefore, that Charles Parker would approve wholeheartedly of the work that you're doing with ordinary people that happen to live inside HMP Liverpool. Ellie, Beckett and Parker, we can see them here, they were very different characters. I don't know if they ever met, so I'm sorry, this is fake news. I don't know if they ever met.
There'd be an interesting play in the conversation, though, wouldn't there?
Imagine being in that room. Imagine.
I wonder if somebody could commission that.
Yeah, I don't know if they ever met. Well, yes. Can we? What an interesting idea. We don't know what they thought of each other's work. We don't. But what we do know is that they both loved working with radio, and they were both audio pioneers. Beckett wrote a number of radio plays, as you mentioned earlier, for BBC Third programme between 1956 and 1962. And that's almost at exactly the same time that the original radio ballads were made. What other parallels do you think we can draw between these two radio-loving pioneers?
Yeah, so it's quite difficult to find yourself following Piers Plowright in talking carefully and thoughtfully and eloquently about people like Charles Parker and Beckett, but here we are. And, you know, he talked about that idea of the business of the heart. And I think the post-war context for these two men is really essential to understanding them. I think universally, the business of the heart changes after the Second World War. So both of these men find themselves asking a question of themselves, of their actors, of their audiences, of their collaborators. You know, who do we need to hear from in order to understand the world that we live in now? And I think that although these men are very different, that they are united by that question and by that drive to find new ways of telling stories that get to the business of the heart and the human condition, which, you know, I think is what Piers Plowright is seeing in them when he's talking about them in the ways that we heard earlier on.
I think something else which had not occurred to me until today, and listening to what people have said, the various presenters have so eloquently described this afternoon, is silence. The incredible power in absence, in space, in the space between words and noise. And I guess I've been sat here sort of reflecting on that as I've been hearing people talk and thinking that one of the things that I know about prisons, having worked in them for many, many years, is they're never places of silence. They have a very particular soundscape, which is quite extraordinary and impossible to describe.
We tried. We made a program about it.
Yeah, I know. It was a lovely piece. But each prison has its own soundscape, doesn't it, as well? I'm always constantly reminded that I started working in prisons in the late 80s, and it used to be that when you walked into a prison, you would always hear Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. It would just be blasting out everywhere. And now, of course, you don't hear music that much because everybody has headphones or little cell radios. So the landscape shifts and changes over time as well. The soundscape shifts and changes.
I think you'll find they're all sitting in their cells listening to National Prison Radio.
Of course, yes, of course they are. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. Yeah.
So I've been making radio with people in prison for nearly 2 decades. Simon, as you just alluded to, you've been working in the combined disciplines of arts and criminal justice for more than 30 years. I wonder if you can describe for us some of the challenges and rewards you've experienced during that time of working with and giving a voice to ordinary people that happen to live in prison.
I guess the main challenge is something which runs through my aesthetic and through the practice of the work that I do and that I train people to do, which is the idea that you're working in the most restrictive of circumstances. So the idea that rather than seeing limitation as a problem, actually seeing limitation as a starting point for doing something interesting. So we have this really cheesy company motto, which is limitation is stimulation. And I was thinking about that when there's that lovely diagram of the studio up there. It's like, how do you deal with the limiting factors of technology in the 1950s so that you could record those ballads. You know, it's response to limitation, and that drives the aesthetic of our work. What was the second half of your question, Phil? Because I sort of got carried away there.
Challenges and rewards.
Rewards. The key reward for me is genuinely having people say that they have found a voice through creative arts practice. A lot of our work is about capturing narratives and stories and allowing people to legitimately share those stories. And the joy of watching somebody walk off stage or present a piece of visual art or play a piece of music that they've created or that they've been a part of creating, which tells you something about them, is absolutely immeasurable.
Amazing. Ellie, it's not every day that somebody wanders into a prison, a big old Victorian prison, and produces a Beckett play with a bunch of people that live in there. What about this project most excites you, and what makes you most nervous?
Well, working within a university, I'm very familiar with institutional bureaucracy, and I am frightened. I am frightened about how individuals interface with bureaucracy and with institutions, and what that might mean for creative practice. But I'm just now very reassured by Simon about, limitation is stimulation. Okay, so I'm just going to tell myself that and reassure myself in that way. In terms of being excited, I am a teacher, I'm a writer, I'm a theatre maker, but I'm a teacher first and foremost through both of those things and through the work that I do at university. And so watching anybody learn, encounter something new, hear something new, do something new for the first time is the most exciting thing. And there's nothing more exciting than that. So that's probably what I'm most excited about. I was also invited to request that there might be some consideration given to broadcasting the work that we make with the men in HMP Liverpool on the National Prison Radio Network. That would be super exciting.
That would be really nice.
Really exciting.
If we could find a way of making that happen.
Really exciting.
Let's think about impact for a minute. While I'm asking this final question, could I ask Andy, there's a little grey bag by a radiator over there, and I wanted to get something out of it at the end, and I forgot to bring it up. I think I forgot to bring it up. Yeah, I forgot to bring it up. Impact. What do you hope this project will achieve, both for the men that you work with inside HMP Liverpool and for the wider audience who will eventually hear the broadcast, and who will hear it?
Well, initially, the people that will hear it will be the participants, people within the prison, and then it will be played at the conference event in May, I think it's late May?
May and June.
May and June. Like Ellie said, we hope it goes on the radio. It'd be great if other men in prison across the prison estate could have an opportunity to hear it.
Men and women and children.
And women and children. I think what I always want out of those things, kind of echoing what Ellie said, is people having the opportunity to learn within those quite restrictive spaces and try something out new. But there's also a big part of our work which is about advocacy, which is about demystifying imprisonment to the public and to people out there. And the way that we do that is by doing work like this, and demonstrating to the world that people in prison are first and foremost people. And that can be done really effectively, I think, through creative arts practice.
Yeah, and I would say I think there's probably a value in having a figure as culturally significant, as canonical as Samuel Beckett is, in bringing his work to the men, to the listeners, to this piece, and having them understand that actually someone at that level is so deeply in tune with the experiences that they own, that are theirs. It's not that he is supplanting their voices or he is ventriloquizing them, it's that he's got that deep connection with an understanding of who they are and where they are.
Amazing. I think I know someone who runs a radio station in prisons. I'll have a chat with them and see what we can sort out. Let's talk about it. It would be an honour to broadcast it, honestly. It would be an honour. I've got a favour to ask. Can I come when you do the final recording? Can I come into the prison and be there?
Yep,
you would be very much welcome. That'd be very exciting. Thank you both, Dr. Eleanor Liebeck, Simon Ruding, for such a thought-provoking discussion. The clear spirit of innovation and social engagement embodied by Samuel Beckett and Charles Parker lives on through this project. I can't wait to see the impact of it, both inside the prison and outside the prison walls. Finally, before you go, I've got a little present for you both. You know, in radio, we really love radio station mugs.
Wow.
They're quite rare.
Oh, yes.
I can retire now. This is all I want.
Put your hands together for Ellie and Simon. Thank you both so much. I was asked to do 20 minutes and we've come in at 19 minutes and 15 seconds. Thank you for that. I've got one final thing to say before I can relax for the rest of the afternoon, which is before we hand over to Talia and Megan for our next session, I'd like to tell you about my remarkable friend, Mark Williams. Mark won the very first Charles Parker Prize in 2005 for a radio feature he produced called Inside Out. The powerful radio feature charted his journey as he left Wandsworth Prison, offering a raw and honest insight into the challenges and hopes that come with re-entering society. I first met Mark a year later in 2006, and we've been friends ever since then. He's done a number of remarkable things since winning the inaugural Charles Parker Prize, but his love of audio was never far away, and almost 20 years on from making radio inside prisons and from winning this prestigious prize, Mark's about to complete his MA in audio production at the University of Westminster. Although he couldn't be here in person with us today, he's very much a part of this celebration. And I therefore asked him to record a message for us and to introduce the next session. So I'm grateful to him for doing so. Over to you, Mark.
As Phil said, I'm Mark Williams, and I won the very first Charles Parker Award in 2005, the year that it launched. And to put that into perspective, in April 2004, 20 years ago next month, I left Wandsworth Prison holding a bag of my belongings, a microphone and a mini disc recorder to capture what became the radio feature Inside Out. That sense of achievement, having won the Charles Parker Award back then, never left me, and today, as then, it continues to validate the belief that people had in me. It reinforces the idea that my voice mattered, that what I had to say was as valuable as what anybody else had to say. Since I won this award, there's been many others who've gone on to have great careers in radio and audio production, and actually that experience is helping me to complete my Masters in Audio Production today. Shortly we'll be finding out who will be following in our footsteps in 2024 as the winners of this year's Charles Parker Award. But first, I'm going to hand you over to two winners of the Charles Parker Award from 2022. Over to you, Megan and Talia.
Hello. Hi. So I thought we could start by just saying what our programmes were about that won. So what was Down on the Farm about?
So Down on the Farm was about the horrific landscape of being a farmer in the UK and the disastrous mental health statistics that more than one farmer a week takes their own life. And as someone that grew up in rural Shropshire, it was a story very close to me. And actually, despite being 200 miles away, doing my Masters in Sunderland, the farmer that I managed to interview was someone from a neighbouring farm back home. Yeah, what about you?
So I made The Sound Collector, and it was about a poem that I thought my sister wrote about our mum who died, but it wasn't by her, and it was sort of me figuring out what to do with that. Yeah, and how was the experience of being a finalist? What did that mean to you?
So I'd actually entered the Charles Parker Prize twice before, very unsuccessfully, when I was doing my undergrad in TV and radio at Salford Uni. And then the pandemic happened, and I was, God, I want to produce speech radio. That was always my career goal. Radio 4 was just the dream. And through doing student radio, I had friends at Sunderland at Spark that were like, there's a Masters. And I was like, that's another chance for me to enter the Charles Parker Prize. So genuinely, one of the main reasons why I got myself into a bit more student debt was for this award. And all of the other awards that you can enter as a student, and like the Community Radio Awards and the Student Radio Awards. So for me, it was definitely a case of, it's a career goal that I just really want to tick. I'd had friends that had done it or had even just been nominated. And yeah, I was a bit envious, really. So it was definitely something that I'd had my eye on, and now it's something that I've ticked off. And I'm really happy settling into my career, going in a slightly different direction, knowing that I don't have to compare myself to peers throughout radio that have done that and achieved that, because I've got that.
You've done it.
No one
You've
can take it
achieved
away
it.
from me. But what about you? Because you're still on the creative audio-y track.
So I sort of stumbled into it because I did English literature. I didn't study audio. I just weaseled my way into an audio course semi-accidentally, semi-forcefully. And then the first piece I ever made was this piece, and it was a finalist for the Charles Parker Prize, and that absolutely astounded me. And I think about it a lot, that if I didn't make that piece, if I didn't stumble into that course, I don't think I would have been an audio producer for a long time. I have this vision that eventually I would have met up with audio again, but I don't think I would have left uni and taken the leap to try and go into an audio career, which isn't easy. Ultimately, it is a more risky, arty career. No stress. It's fine. You can do it. It's all fine. And so I think making that piece and winning the Charles Parker Award was a huge validation that I can do this. There is a space. What about after you finally achieved it? Where did you go from there?
So near the end of my master's at Sunderland, I started freelancing. And this is also like my biggest tip if you are a student or someone that's wanting to get into radio, is to make friends with every single person that you meet, because you never know when they'll be like, I need a freelancer for this. So I got a bit of freelance work through a friend that I'd made. And then after graduating, it turned into a full-time job. So I'm a podcast producer for a North American indie called Edit Audio, where we edit audio. I think we've got a clip of one of my shows that I produced, Mina AF.
My mom's going to kill me for telling the story because she's mortified every time I bring it up. I think I was in 5th grade and I was wearing these overalls, and it was cool to like have one of the shoulders like undone.
What a hussy.
And that's what my mom thought. she was like, absolutely not. And she's like, do you know why they do that, Ashley? And I was like, And she's like, it's so they can get undressed faster to have sex.
Yeah, so not quite Radio 4, is it? But again, like comedy and entertainment was the path that I really wanted to go down, and I'm really glad that I stumbled into Edit Audio and get to produce great shows like Mina AF. Just launched a new show this week, Truthworks, which is the ex-chief talent officers at Netflix talking about leadership, which is so inspiring. It's incredible to have that different way of telling such important stories in a longer form. Always on podcasts are hard work, because you've always got to think, what's next week? Have we got something recorded? Let's get it done. But yeah, I wouldn't change it, and I love Edit Audio. It's a great company, and I'm really happy.
Before we go to me, I just want to, you're saying it's not Radio 4 and you're saying it's always on and all of these things, but it's still stories, right? So what would you say is the crossover between the work you made for university and Charles Parker and the work you're making now, which is more of an interview show, but what is at the heart of it that exists in both, do you think?
I think, especially when it comes to Mina AF, because we have a little system where listeners can leave a voice message. And so every day I open up this little inbox to see what listeners have got to say, and it's a two-way conversation. And I think that there's that rapport of just knowing that you've been listened to, and that a story has, even if it just reaches one person's ears, it's worth telling. And we cover all sorts of subjects like grief and miscarriages and all sorts of like quite heavy topics that there are people in communities that, because they've stumbled across a podcast of this person that they like, they're able to feel heard and listened to. And I think that's the same no matter what you're listening to. You're listening because you want to, whether it's to be entertained or whether it's to think about something. It's for everyone. What about you? What have you been up to?
So I did freelance for a year after university, which is hard. But then I got a job at Message Heard, and then a job at Broccoli. But all the while I had these other jobs, I was making things on the side that were more fulfilling for me. no offence. And yeah, a lot of work for Shortcuts and a piece for Radio 4, which I think we have a clip of. It's called Dead Ends, and it feels like a nice continuation of the story I made for Charles Parker in a way.
Okay, I'm getting in the water.
We went to burn the photographs in the spot where she was found. To get there, we had to scale the bottom of the cliffs and wade through the water. She died in a secluded spot. It was just me, my sister, my dad, and my recorder.
I wasn't recording any of it. I wasn't recording any of it.
It's all right, tell you.
It's okay, darling. It's not okay.
We're going to burn some of the seaweed.
Should we fake it?
And say that, you know, here we are throwing. Oops. Yeah?
No, we're not faking it.
We're talking about how you feel.
Well, look, your mama worked in advertising. She was faking it left, right, and centre, so.
Oh, I just can't believe I came all the way here with the recorder and I didn't turn it on. That really upsets me.
That's upsetting, I'm sorry.
Well, I've got some more of the report in the car, so I can go up, lower it down with a bag.
So that was from a piece called Dead Ends, and that was a scene where me, my dad, and my sister are at the bottom of the cliff where my mum died, and we've just burnt some photos of her as a memorial, and I didn't record any of it. We went all the way to Spain, and it's my favorite. It's my favorite scene of the entire thing. Is that little clip, and it's a good reminder that sometimes mistakes can be magic, even if which is you can sell them as that to your execs. But yeah, that's part of the journey, I guess, of this piece.
It's so beautiful, and everything that you make, I think, is gorgeous like that anyway. Do you feel like this was the continuation of a side of a story that you didn't get to tell with Sound Collector?
Yeah, I think the Sound Collector was one little neat sort of story arc where it was beginning, middle, and end. And then there were all these fragments of story that didn't really fit anywhere. And that's what I made Dead Ends out of, because if you listen to it, it's 5 short pieces and it's sort of, they all relate to each other in a way, but they're all their own little pieces. And so I think I was speaking to one of you, I apologise, I can't remember who, and you were talking about how you did this 3-hour interview and you had to choose and you had to cut. And we all know that as audio makers, it can feel so painful. And I think Dead Ends in a way was actually going back to the cutting room floor and going, no, let me do something with these stories that I didn't get to, these things that I didn't get to follow, I guess. So yeah, it can feel like when you make a piece, it's over, but you never know when you're going to come back to those ideas.
And you wrote a really nice blog the other day about it. I really recommend going and finding that blog. Genuinely, it's a really lovely blog piece about your journey creating these audio pieces. Are we all right for time? Should we just share our tips for getting into industry to wrap up? Do you have one to go first?
Oh God!
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first. You go after you.
I was actually saying this earlier. One of my big tips is don't say yes to everything. You don't have to. And I think it's quite a intense and privileged piece of advice that you often get pushed onto you whilst you're at uni, whilst you're looking for things that you've got to take advantage of everything. It can be a very anxious process. I remember I was doing some street teams for a commercial station because I thought that would get me closer to my radio career. It absolutely didn't. Nobody there cared that I was another member of the street team. I did 2 shifts, didn't get paid, and never went back. And that has not hurt my career whatsoever. So if you are there thinking, oh, I should have done... also, the beauty of the internet, if you are too anxious to go up to someone today, you can probably find their email address, find me on LinkedIn, get in touch. Like, there's ways of having those connections with industry if you are a bit too timid to make the most of them when they're right in front of you?
On that, saying no to things, I've just gone freelance again, and I'm about to say no to a big job. Anyway, and my friend was consoling me, and she said that her metric is the money good enough? Does it interest you, and will you learn something from it? Do you feel like you'll gain something from it? And two of those need to be true. And it was a really, really helpful metric. And obviously when you're starting out, like you will learn something from everything. And so that's sort of ticked off, but you need to keep checking in with yourself because that will change. And then my other piece of advice for new people is to really never forget yourself and your own style, because you'll find you'll go into these jobs, hopefully, and you'll work, whether it's at the BBC or at a production company or somewhere, and they'll have their own style and they'll have their programs that you're making for them. But I really, whether it's in your spare time, in your bedroom, no one hearing it, or whether it's just pitching to Shortcuts, or whether it's whatever, really keep working on yourself all the while, because otherwise you'll feel like you've lost yourself, or you've lost the reason why you got into it in the first place. And sometimes those companies don't exist anymore and you'll be a bit lost without them. So yeah, have a real sense of yourself and keep investing in yourself, I would say.
I have one last tip, which is to subscribe to Talia's newsletter, All Here. Genuinely, what Talia does every month is she collects all of the opportunities in the audio industry and puts them all on an email for everyone. That, to me, if I had that when I was like a graduate, would have been phenomenal. So do that.
Thank you, one person.
Thank you very much. Talia and Megan, it's great to hear from you again. It's fantastic to hear from you and to hear what you've been up to. I should just let you know, or remind you if you already know but may have forgotten, that the winners from last year's Charles Parker Prize from 2022 are going to be broadcast next week. Is that right, Andy? On Radio 4, 9:45 a.m. Monday through to Friday. So I think Megan's is on Tuesday and Talia's is on Good Friday, 9:45, or else you can just look for New Storytellers in BBC Sounds and catch up with it whenever you can. So don't miss that. So thanks again. Let's find out who the winners are for 2024. It's come to that time. It's the moment we've been waiting for. Well, 9 people in the room, plus Irene in Rome. Irene, if you're still online, thank you very much for sticking with us. So let's find out who the winners will be, who will get their features broadcast on air. So I'd just like to welcome back 2 people to do this final piece. Simon Elms, Chair of Judges, welcome back, and also Hugh Levinson, who had a very difficult choice of making the final decision on this. So welcome back, Hugh and Simon. Thank you.
So I'm just going to introduce this last moment and give you the citation of the winner, and Hugh will announce it. Is that all right, Hugh? Okay, so this is the moment a lot of you are waiting for, and as you heard earlier, the competition is very hot, close run, and disputatious. Amongst the 8 jurors, there was a wide variety of opinions and scores, unsurprisingly, frankly, in this very, very rich year. So how do you compare the relative merits of the experiences of pregnant mothers with memories of the Greenham Common Peace Camp or the life of a male pole dancer? We had all of those. But there was in the end a high degree of consensus that formed around 2 entries that the judges were highly enthusiastic about. These days we don't award a silver and bronze award in this competition, sadly, but anyway, we do award 4 other prizes alongside the gold, which Hugh will talk about. But we would like this year just like to offer our praise, if not our prize, to Naomi Bloomstein of UCL for her wonderfully vivid programme about Yiddish, the national language of nowhere. In the end, the jurors felt that this year there was one programme that stood out from the rest, not least on account of its unusual and innovative production that, like Parker's works, reflects the lives of the neglected and the often nameless. The judges said, the execution is beautiful, the actuality is strong, and the effects and music components exquisitely done. It is very moving, blending history with the politics and meaning behind what's going on today. It's very powerful to have both this space and this radio feature commemorating sex workers. I loved it. So, Hugh, who won it?
It is The Outcast, Dead and Alive. Well done. And can I pick up a phrase that was used earlier in the day about Piers Plowright, which was rippled with visuality. And really visual radio is such a rare thing. And that was one of the things that was really special about this piece, I think, one of many things.
So congratulations to Grace Reeve of Goldsmiths, University of London. Shall we just hear a clip? Or you hear the other winners first? Okay. Over to you.
Should I just say, this was genuinely a nightmare. The standard was really, really, really high this year, and all the pieces had something really special about them. So this was a really tough one. I would say if you were not one of the final five, please don't be disappointed. Well, you will be disappointed. Don't be too disappointed, because you are brilliant and have done some great pieces. And I'd love to talk to you about them if we have the time before the train goes. The other four are, as Simon mentioned, The National Language of Nowhere, which is a piece for Menches everywhere. Full Circle, Fight Fair, which is really, 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 really tremendous, and Friends of the Wall, which is splendid. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So let's hear a tiny clip from the winning programme, The Outcast, Dead and Alive.
We've got the trans angel behind you, and the arc of the wing is very similar to the arch under which people enter, because it's a goose's wing. And then if you turn right away from the trans angel and look towards the City of London, it's the ribbon gates, which are dedicated to the outcast on the left, and then the city rising above on the other side.
I mean, I always still look for some of the old stuff that I put on the gates when I first started going. I think they all got withered away. You had to bring your own ribbons and you had to bring your own stuff, and now ribbons are brought so people don't feel the pressure and feel excluded. You can bring your own stuff, but there are always ribbons there. I mean, I'm trying to put gold and silver ribbons up there so when it blows it sparkles a bit more. That's what I want.
There's a constant yin-yangy type of interplay with the wilderness of the garden. It can't be detached from its urban setting. I can see a visitor's just walked up to the Green Man or Pagan Shrine there. We've created that in the last few months out of old bits of junk found around the site, broken suitcases, trays which are filled with ivy. Taking all these materials and repurposing them.
It's about what's in the ground. That is what's magic, and we don't want to lose the magic, because once that's gone, it's gone forever, and the developers come in and they are devoid of magic, and it needs to have this creativity, it needs to have this activism in it. The people that they fear the most are the people with the big mouths, and that is what's got it free-ish, and we need to celebrate that. Without that, we're all robots walking past, basically, and I don't know any other space that's been fought for so viciously that is a very kind of peaceful space.
Thank you very much. So we know 9 of you, all the nominees are here. If you're in the room, go and stand up so we can praise you all and give you all a warm. Congratulations, everyone. Thank you. That includes you, Irene. I hope you're standing up as well. Fantastic. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Simon. Congratulations, everyone. And I should also just let you know before we go that if you do want to hear more about Charles Parker and the radio ballads, tonight on BBC Radio 4, you can hear Charles Parker, Radio Pioneer, which is presented by Sean Street, our first speaker today, and produced by the person who took over running Charles Parker Day, person who we all know and we all love, and we must give him huge thanks as always. It's produced by Andy Cartwright. So 9 o'clock tonight on Radio 4. Don't miss it. So we'll just say thanks and goodbye to our guests who are watching via the online stream. We hope to see you next year. Thank you. Bye. Say bye. Bye.